Last time our recording didn't do as well, so make sure, particularly if you're down to that end, try to project a little so that we have everybody included. So I'm James Savamatsu, Chair of the Task Force. Michelle from Housing.
Angela Chu.
Dara Papo, Care Coordination Services Manager, Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing. I'm a guest here today.
Thank you.
Mark Antonetti, Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing, Manager of Permanent Supportive Housing.
Larry Kessler, Department of Public Health, Environmental Health Branch.
Clifford Gilmore, Central City SRO Collaborative.
Dan Jordan, Tenant Rep and Housing Peer Counselor for the Central City SRO Collaborative.
Peter Keith, I'm the Chief Attorney for the Code Enforcement Division in the City Attorney's Office. I'm the legal advisor for the committee, or for the task force, rather.
Sam Patel, owner, operator.
Jordan Davis, Tenant Rep.
Jennifer Chung-Ju, Administrative Support.
All right. Is there a motion to take an item out of order?
Oh, sorry, yes. Hi, this is Margot for the record, and I would ask that we do number 5 before number 4 so that our guest who came in especially for this can leave afterwards.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
All right. All those in favor? All right. So we'll do that. Item 3 is the approval of the minutes.
Peter Keith for the City Attorney's Office. I have one correction to the minutes on the bottom of page 2. It reads, Peter also announced that he had not received any responses regarding charging SRO tenants guests for using showers from the rent board. That should be corrected to read, Peter also announced that the rent board had not adopted a position regarding charging SRO tenants guests for using showers.
Okay, that's an important clarification. Great.
They were responsive, it's just they didn't have a position.
Okay. Anything else? All right. Do I give a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion.
Sam Patel. Second?
Second.
Angela Chu. All those in favor? Opposed? Passes without objection. Okay, item 5, wellness checks.
Should I just, well, you put it on the agenda. Do you want to say how it came and got on the agenda?
We had several people request it.
Okay. So, Mark Antonetti for the record. I'm not sure if this is, it seems that this is partly what people were looking for, is that the department, now that we are a department, all the homeless services, supportive housing is under one roof, we have started developing some policies and procedures that are really department-wide, and those that they really apply, for example, to all our permanent supportive housing, where before we had different kind of, depending on what department our portfolio was, we had different policies and procedures. So we, one of the policies and procedures we were looking at were wellness checks. Pretty much everybody, or everybody I should say, of our contractors has some kind of wellness check policy in place, but there are best practices. And so the department, with help especially from Dara, who helps us with a lot of the policy and procedure development, we put together a policy and taking into account many different issues, as you can imagine. Dara is here to talk about it. A lot of it is adopted from policies that were already existing and that were best practices, and really putting together something that hopefully will work for seniors, for adults, for families, for transition age youth, in permanent supportive housing. So we are actually still in the draft phase. We got some feedback from some of the landlords that they were concerned about a couple of things, and so we took it to our city attorneys, and we also got more input. So because it is still in draft form, it isn't something that we can hand out at this point. but any kind of input would be much appreciated, and Dara is here to talk more specifically about the policy and where we're at with it.
So the goal, this is Dara Papa for the record, the goal of the policy is to balance two complicated things. One being people's autonomy to live independently in housing, and also to help people make sure that if people are vulnerable, have a expected or unexpected health condition, that the staff and community are able to help respond if somebody isn't doing so well. And so those two things are hard to balance at the right level, at the right amount for every individual person. So we recognize that no policy is going to address every situation perfectly. But knowing that a number of people who live in supportive housing may be senior, disabled, have chronic health issues, have unexpected health issues, we want to make sure that if staff doesn't see somebody in generally 72 hours, that we check on them. And this is sort of developed to make sure that within a reasonable amount of time, people also that the community knows that folks are looking out for each other. And this could be initiated if a neighbor comes and tells a staff person, I either haven't seen my neighbor for a while or a friend I'm concerned about, that could warrant staff, door knocking. And checking on somebody is as simple as knocking on the door, making a phone call. As long as the person sort of says, like, I'm here, I'm fine, great. The goal is for staff just to say, we're available if you need. Also, if somebody's going to be going out of town for a while or something, we just ask them, just make sure staff are aware so that we're not like wondering if somebody's, not okay. There is in the California Civil Code, that you guys know more than I do, the opportunity for a landlord to enter a unit in cases of emergency. And we have, with feedback from the city attorney, got the confirmation that imminent threat of somebody's health and well-being is something that can constitute an emergency and is the opportunity for a landlord and support staff to key the room. In my past job, I worked also in supportive housing, and there were times that wellness checks have saved people's lives. People had fallen, were not able to get to the phone, were either unconscious or really, really sick and fragile, and the staff's ability to go in and contact emergency services in many situations saves lives. It also was a time that some people were found to be deceased in their unit. And we never want a situation where somebody's dead in their unit for weeks at a time. That's not the type of buildings that supportive housing wants to do, and that's not the care that we bring to the communities where we serve. And so the goal is for wellness checks to sort of help reduce the risk. Wellness checks can happen more often. Certain people will say, like, I want a wellness check. I'm not doing so good. Can you check with me tomorrow? And staff will work with them on that. And the goal is to have a policy that is generally 72 hours, is sort of what was considered a reasonable amount of time, with the ability, if staff had a serious concerns under the law, that staff might enter a unit.
So what is the 72 hours?
The 72 hours is if staff haven't seen or heard from somebody within 72 hours and have some concerns. Like if somebody's generally at work or at school or out during the day, it may be reasonable that they don't see them for 72 hours. But generally, if there's somebody who's around in the building and oftentimes seen by staff, if they're not seen for 3 days or so, the request is that staff check on them.
And like I said, that is very much best practice. Again, if there's an additional concern, if people either ask for it or if somebody is known as being really frail, there might be a concern faster. But in general, the desk clerks in our buildings also just kind of, a lot of times they are the ones that see somebody. So it's not like support services has to see somebody or a very specific person has to see somebody. So there's a bit of I haven't seen Margot. Well, I did. Mm-hmm. You didn't take her off, but I did.
Yes.
So, so Margot's room will not be checked. We've also had the situation, where a wellness check occurred one day, and the next day a person had passed away, and the person was fine upon wellness check. So those things happen, and so we want to make sure that we don't treat that situation as something that can happen all the time. So now let's, wellness check everybody within a day. The person was wellness checked then because a neighbor was concerned. I don't know if they had heard. I was on vacation, so I don't know if somebody had fallen. Sometimes people hear like a thump, or they were just, they had a concern. So, and they were like,
Yeah.
Peter Keith, I have a couple of questions. One is which facilities will this policy apply to? And the second is how will the policy be communicated to tenants?
So the policy would be for units that the Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing funds and has services staff in them. So it's intended for the supported housing population, which is generally a population that has experienced homelessness and oftentimes has some level of vulnerability or potential disability. It is communicated to people in a variety of ways. One of the things that we have as part of this policy is a form that will be given to tenants either upon lease signing for new tenants or for people who currently exist in the building, and also asking it to be posted around the buildings. So previously it's generally been communicated in various ways, but we want to make sure that communication is standard across the board.
What other questions do we have, Jordan?
Jordan Davis, tenant rep, Dara, is it? Thank you very much for coming, and I also want to thank you for mentioning tenants' autonomy. I'm the only person on this body who lives in a building under HSH, and I guess and I got notice of it at the end of last month, and apparently there was the policy wasn't finalized in a follow-up notice. I'm guessing after attending a tenant meeting last night where it was actually part of it was controversial. There needs to be. Has there been any consideration of opt-out provision, because this new policy, as it was circulated, superseded a policy within the Tenderloin Housing Clinic which allowed for people to opt out if they so choose?
So I think that where the emergency safety check, so what we've done with feedback from the city attorney is we separated the policy. So it used to be the wellness check and emergency safety check policy. And basically, people can't opt out from emergency safety checks because these are things that are emergency. And so those are things that, landlords can always enter the unit. The wellness check part, what we want to try to figure out is what the balance is that makes sense for the community. And so as far as opting out, I think if people don't want to have staff proactively contact them, I think it's relatively simple to make sure that, at least a couple times a week, people have some contact with somebody on staff. And generally, if they're coming and going from the building, that's sufficient. And so we're not really sure how the opt-out policy would allow us to be responsible if there was a safety potential concern. So that's, I think, what we're balancing, is how would we know if somebody may not be doing well if we don't have contact with them if they're holed up in their room, not leaving their room, and not talking to anybody. I guess I just want to sort of get a sense of what would be the counterbalance for that safe emergency wellness check. Yeah.
Well, the issues that came up in last night's tenant meeting around the opt-in, opt-out was that several people have reported, and they didn't want wellness checks, that they were checked on more than twice within 72 hours because I guess the desk clerk gave I guess the desk clerk just didn't check them off or something, or I don't know. But the practical concern here, and this is not an emotional disability rights thing, this is a practical concern. There's some people who are less at risk. I mean, we're all like disabled, but there's some people who are less at risk.
Mhm.
There's also like some people, there's also some people who are more at risk. So how would we prioritize the
Right.
need? Because I have 130 people in my other tenants in my building, and
Yeah.
I just don't want. I just am worried that like if we do this blanket policy without any opting out, that it'll like shift resources away from those who need it the most and those who like have indicated that. I mean, obviously we're adults. The people who live in this building are adults, and they know what's best for them. They know what's best for them, and it's just where is this gonna like lead to unintended consequences of not getting help to where it's needed the most?
That's a really excellent question. I'm glad you brought that up. I think especially in large buildings, we want to make sure that the folks that need extra support can get that, and that we're not trying to like over-service people that are living their lives and doing really well. A couple of strategies I think have been used in other buildings that I've worked in. One is for residents to be sort of proactive and either to have something that like you put on your door that says like, I'm fine, you know, like if my door hanger is up, it means like I'm gone for the day, I'm fine. Or leaving a note for staff, you know, just like even just sort of being like putting something at the front desk, like my name is like, you know, everything's okay. So I think when we have large buildings, the concern that I have is it's hard for every staff to keep track of who's necessarily opted out at what time from a wellness check policy. And I would hate for us to not realize if somebody had changed their status from an opt-out to opt-in. And given that there's, you know, usually a number of different staff working, my hope is that for people that feel like they don't need a wellness check on a regular basis, they don't, you know, they don't want somebody calling them or door knocking them, that we can find a strategy for people to sort of proactively communicate twice a week, either in writing or just like saying hi to the front desk as they come and go, that could be sufficient to fulfill that you know, that part of the policy.
I have a question about the desk
Yes.
clerk. It just seems like it might be tough for a desk clerk to just note people walking by all the time. So when you're saying they haven't been seen, well, the desk clerk didn't see them, but
Right.
doesn't mean that they're not there.
Right. And I think that generally in most buildings, I think that that's in part why we weren't going to have it be every day, that's too much.
But even just a couple times a week is.
When there's stable desk clerks at a building, they usually do have a good sense of sort of who's who. But I think also there is the risk of an unnecessary phone call or door knock. I think across the board, the feedback that we've heard from the variety of tenant groups that have sort of weighed in and, you know, given feedback to staff about this over the years is that they would prefer to have occasional unnecessary door knock or phone call to check in on them versus being down in their room and not having anybody know that. And so that's sort of the feedback that those sort of best practices and guidelines were created on.
Okay, just one follow-up on the desk clerk. Are the desk clerks employed by the nonprofit or are they employed by the hotel?
Probably any number of situations at different hotels.
Well, pretty much all of our sites are rented by a nonprofit from a building owner. And Sam, you can speak more on that, but many of them are, and so they are nonprofits. And Sam can talk to the ones that are not. We definitely have a part of the policy where we said, you know, you can implement certain things the way that you would like to. So we have there are agencies that we have that have they have a tick off. The desk clerk just kind of ticks people off as they have seen them. And even in large buildings, it's not usually like 20 people coming in and out at the same time. We did not want to make that how people were implementing it, also given the workload and so forth. We were not going to say this is how it has to be done. So that there is some, so that there's some consideration of what kind of building people have and so forth and how they want to implemented. Sam, you had.
Sam Patel for the record. So I do manage two buildings for nonprofit. One's 110 units, one's 64 units. And one of the concerns I do have is, and we do wellness checks, and we're, knock on wood, we've had a good success with that. One of the concerns I do have as a private property manager, with our desk clerks, we train them, we do whatever, but these type of policies could open us up to liability issues also, and has that been considered?
So we did get feedback from the city attorney, and just to sort of, this is Dara Papo again, just to sort of recertify, it starts with a phone call or a door knock. And the goal is that, which would be done by the services staff or the desk clerk. If there's somebody who, and sometimes also before entering a unit, the services staff might call other providers or an emergency contact if they have a release to do so, just to make sure, like, if we know that somebody generally gets services at another place, like, the goal is that before we key a unit, that they've tried to locate the person through reasonable means. And the keying a door would only be in something that would have been identified by an emergency. It's possible if somebody wasn't seen for 3 days, the staff determination might be, because that's a general guideline, that, we're going to check on them tomorrow. We're going to ask the desk clerk to sort of keep an eye out. We know that they sometimes leave early in the morning, and we're just going to sort of keep an eye on the situation.
Sam Patel again. I mean, one of the things that we do on a monthly, so our manager actually, when there's pest control done, a manager does go
Yeah.
to each and every unit to make sure. So that if somebody is having an issue, so we're in a kind of a unique situation where we just do the property management aspect. We don't do the services. So we do allow, we just let services know that, keep an eye on this person.
Yeah.
And, so that's how we've been doing it. Or if, like you said, if a tenant hasn't been seen from the neighbor, they come down, we'll follow up on it,
Yeah.
and then let services know that this is what's happening. But my concern is that if there is a written policy and says, okay, and desk clerks are responsible, and something happens, and this person gets sick or passes away, and then the family comes in and says, hey, look, you had a written policy, why wasn't this done?
Yeah.
How is that, that's the concern I have.
Yeah, that's a question. And I think that when we've had unexpected deaths within supportive housing, that has already sort of been the sort of response from, if there were concerns. There have been concerns that we've done too much, and there have been concerns we haven't done enough.
Yeah.
I think the goal is that from the city attorney's standpoint, we definitely had the sense that this policy sort of was within California Civil Code. And I think that this is where it's helpful and important for services to sort of document, the contact that they had, the attempts they did to try to locate somebody, and sort of, what was, having the notes of the room inspection. I don't know that I can answer that specific question. It wasn't something that the city attorney had expressed concern with reviewing the policy, but I look at Margo. Yeah.
Peter Keith, the city attorney. I mean, of course, the advice that's given by the city attorney is, to DHSH is subject to attorney-client privilege, but I can offer the general observation that the liability rules for public agencies that adopt policies like this are very different from the liability rules for private parties. So it's definitely an area where any guidance the city attorney has given to DHSH probably would not be applicable. Again, this is in terms of the owner becoming liable for a mishap to a tenant. The private liability rules in California are different from public entity rules.
Helpful to know.
Okay, Margo, then Jordan.
Yeah, so in general, and I can't speak to your specific situation, in general, if we fund agencies for permanent supportive housing in the master lease buildings, they make subcontract with another party. And so then, it's the agencies that we contract with that is responsible for implementing policies. I know we are talking a lot about desk clerks, and I think the reason we are doing that is because we don't want to assume that everybody works with services. But I think a lot of times it's going to actually be the service providers who know or keep an eye on it. Service providers, they're not supposed to be sitting in their offices. They're supposed to, be in the communities. They're supposed to be looking at, whatever kind of finders and so forth people have at desks in terms of check-in. Some of our buildings, they have a check-in for in-home support services so that they can see, who has been served or why is in-home support services leaving within 5 minutes. So there are lots of different ways in which, and in-home support services, for example, is another provider that would be able to say, they never not answer the door. Could you please take a look? So this is not all on desk clerks. This is really as a program within, the city where we house 7,500 households. We want to make sure as much as we can without controlling people or controlling, life in general, that we give some guidance around we are housing a very specific population, and we want to make sure that there's a certain amount of checking and safety in place. And, and there is always that delicate balance, definitely.
Jordan.
Trust me, I know about having to deal with a neighbor dying. My next door neighbor actually passed away, and I'll have to say it was a little, I wasn't close with him, and frankly I didn't want to be close with him, but he just, it was a little traumatic to see the coroner in there and to have the building sealed, and to have the room sealed off for a really long time, even though this person died of natural causes. That person was probably, but one of the things I've noticed and from conversations and from the tenant meetings is it's mostly what the problem is that people are, the biggest concern is that when people who opt in or complain that they don't, that it doesn't get followed through properly, that they don't get the wellness checks, and there's also been, there's been some concerns. There was a couple years ago, there was an article about somebody in one of the ECS's buildings who died and was practically decomposing in the room and was there for months. When someone dies, there's usually that rotting pork smell after a couple days, so there's no way nobody would know that somebody on the floor was dead. But I guess the big issue here is we need to make sure that those who opt in and those who are most at risk get the wellness checks, and that's what we need. And to expand wellness checks to everyone is just way too controversial.
Okay, let's go to Cliff.
Dan, Dr. Cliff.
Okay.
Living in private hotels, which is what I choose to do, a lot of the landlords don't want to implement anything of the nature of wellness checks. But yet we have a very high population of elderly and sick people. How do you get something implemented?
So, do you
Go ahead.
want to?
I mean, it's
This is
we
the-
get people dying all the time, and nobody does anything, nobody cares.
So what I've seen, I think that from HSH, our ability to create policy is limited to the places that we fund and the service providers that we fund. What I've seen be effective, though, is the sort of neighborhood watch amongst residents. And even in buildings where we have services, there have been times where neighbors will sort of have a thing where it's in one of the senior buildings, I heard that they had sort of a thing where if you put your door hanger out when you leave for the day, you know that you're okay. Or if you take it in, one of the two ways. So that neighbors can have a chance to check on each other, because a lot of the sort of flags from wellness checks really do come when somebody says, you know, the IHSS provider wasn't responsive, a friend wasn't responsive, you know, we're concerned about our neighbor. And so I would think that the community could at least have some things that they could do and bring the landlord's attention if they felt something needed to be checked on, or calling emergency services to do so.
Cliff?
Cliff Gilmore for the record. So a couple things that I wanted to reflect on with this. So with respect to desk clerks, and I'm really talking from experience for Tenoli Housing Clinic, which is a nonprofit supported housing agency, that classification has a high turnover. And so in terms of tenant desk clerks really beginning to know the population, their relationships, is challenging. So the supportive services side of it is where through THC, that's where the wellness checks actually really occur. And so, but some other things that I'm reflecting on this issue. Our leadership program has about 40 tenants in it, most of them from SRO hotels, supportive housing, a few that are from private hotels. So we actually took just a quick survey to take the temperature of the leadership at our last meeting. So of the 40 people, I think it was 36 said that they preferred to have wellness checks. And the others actually had to practice some form of information about the fact that they had opted out, but they felt it's their responsibility to say, okay, I've opted out through the CC policy before, but in fact, I recognize if I'm not informing people that I'm going on vacation or I'm working or something like that, then it could result in someone coming in. I don't want to have a wellness check. So I think it is incumbent upon tenants like that to actually be proactive with that aspect of it. I also wonder, with regard to tenants who have opted out previously under the previous policy, and in a particular circumstance where, an unfortunate one, where a tenant maybe actually is extremely ill or may have been hospitalized or ultimately even passed away, even though they signed the opt-out clause. And relatives say, I haven't heard from my relative in 2
You're
weeks.
right, yeah.
And so I am trusting that since you're in this supportive housing situation with the structures and everything that come with it, that in fact, I see it as your obligation, your responsibility to my loved one is in your care. And so I can see a family member coming questioning, and I don't know the legality around that, whether it indemnifies the agency or not, but I can see a family questioning and wanting to challenge that, even though the person opted out. And I also like to just share a story, or a couple of things. One thing before the story. I'll use myself as an example. I have a network. I think a lot of us around the table have networks, right? I have brothers and sisters, all that. I don't reach out to them if I'm going through something. I generally just take care of it, try and take care of it myself. And vice versa. And I think a lot of us are like that. And I think that there are some tenants that are like that too. I'm just fine, I'll take care of things myself. But I err on the side of the fact that even though sometimes those of us who have networks, there are times and places when, you know, it would be fine if someone say, hey Peter, how you doing? I mean, it goes a long way, but we don't do that because we feel like we're in control. And one great example I'll give with this is one of the people in our program has a large network, extremely active civically in this city. And this person is everywhere. Last year, this person just disappeared off the radar. And we actually were working with the Supported Housing Agency and asked them about, the wellness checks, everything, and the person just off the grid. So we were persistent, and we actually went to the building after calling dozens of times, because this was out of character.
Yeah.
That's one of the flags, totally out of character. And so we actually went, finally gained entry, and this person was extremely ill. And it's our conclusion that had this not occurred, we probably could have lost this person. And the person actually had to be hospitalized. So it's like, so the reason why I raised the whole network thing and all that is that it's about caring. Someone has to care enough to say, even though, you may not want to be wellness checked, but you're a life, you're a human being, and you matter. And so, excuse me if I want to care enough about to see how you are. And I think, to me, I feel that this policy ends up being on the right side of things, as opposed to being on the side to say, what if?
Jordan, you have any response?
Okay, trying to gather my words here, but with all due respect to the people who support expanding wellness checks to everyone, I gotta be honest, as a disabled person who's been told all her life, this is for your own good, this is for everything, this is for people making decisions about, and that's kind of an trauma issue right there. And just kind of funny, just a couple days ago I was in City Hall Christmas caroling against the conservatorship thing that's going to be, that may be implemented here, and that kind of goes to the idea of we are adults. We can make our decision, and there must be a presumption of competence for people to know what's best for them. Now, if somebody is, I'd be fine with, say, somebody who's the staff maybe had to call 911 on. Maybe they, maybe people who are really sick shouldn't be able to opt out, and maybe they should be opted in. But we really need to respect disability rights. That includes people who, that means being able to have, we should be able to have wellness checks, but we should be able to also not have wellness checks. It's called voluntary services, and that's what this coalition I was Christmas caroling with. I know it's a silly story, but it's goes to things. We need voluntary services, just like a lot of policies need to be voluntary, and HSH need to be voluntary. And unfortunately, many people feel like that HSH, because I guess unlike DPH and unlike DBI, are not under a public commission, and a lot of us feel that these decisions are being made without consulting us, that we have these things sprung up on us, and it's just very disconcerting, and it's just really and it really I'll admit it angers me. And actually, to Dan's point about private SROs, I'd love to see a optional wellness check program in private SROs if we can figure out the logistics on that. I'd be totally fine with that. There's a lot of people aging in place and a lot of disabled people, and it's really necessary.
Can I ask you a question, Jordan?
Yeah.
If there was a period of time, would there be let's say, I'm not really working on any of this issue myself, but let's say there had to be a mandatory wellness check. Is there a period of time, if it wasn't 72 hours, if it was a longer period of time, that would be acceptable?
Once again, my whole concern is my whole concern is deference to the tenant unless they show that they, unless it's apparent that they really need a wellness check.
And can
Okay.
I ask a question? So I think that the goal, the goal of a wellness check is if folks haven't seen or heard from you in some form or another. And so I'm wondering if the goal of the wellness check is that people can totally proactively prevent that from happening. If you don't want a door knock, if you don't want a phone call, have some way of, at some point, and this happened in my other building, there would be people that twice a week they'd call at like 10 p.m. They didn't want to talk to anybody. They'd leave a message, just letting you know I'm fine. That was it. And that sufficed. And so I'm wondering if the goal isn't to take away people's power and autonomy, but it's allow them to be proactive in preventing wellness checks if they don't want to be having a door knock or a phone call.
Are there any other questions, comments?
So I just wanted to comment on a few things. And yes, it would be really nice if there's something that, the task force would come up with in terms of private SROs. I think, the task force is here to talk about privately owned SROs and about SROs that are funded and run by the city. So it's a totally different issue, and the rent board may say, nah, it can't have anything to do with that, but that doesn't mean that it's not something that, that maybe should be looked at, and I think it is an issue in private SROs, and there are a lot of people who are aging in place or just not doing well. And not everybody has a network, and and yet I like your story. I'm not sure that I like the fact that you had to call 55 million times, so I'd like to know about that. So extreme examples make bad policy, and we are not asking our providers to implement an across-the-board policy because one thing has happened in one building. Actually, under DPH, it was mandatory for our providers to have a wellness policy. That was always mandatory. We just didn't say this is what it should be. We had examples for providers who, didn't necessarily know or didn't know where to start, but it wasn't something that providers could not have in place as a written policy. So if that wasn't communicated to anybody, that's problematic, but that's in the past. THC buildings weren't part of DPH. I'm sure HSA had their own policy around that as well. When when we go out to monitor once a year, one of the things we look at is there a grievance policy, is there a wellness policy? We are funding our providers to, in some ways, also develop a community for people who may not have one. And so that means that our providers are expected to also at points be that community, because for some people, they may be the only one. So again, that is not true for everybody, and I'm not trying to say it is true for everybody, but in general, I have heard what you have heard, and it's pretty impressive to hear your data on that you happen to have, and with you. Thank you.
Jordan?
Yeah. And I just am wondering, what happens when, let's say you do a wellness check on somebody and they're not in the room, like what happens next? What's the practice around that? Like, if anyone can chime in if they're a service provider and has dealt with it.
Well, you have been a service provider. I have been a service provider, but you want to speak to that? Yeah.
So generally, if there's if I call or leave a message and door knock and somebody's not there, the first thing you'd probably try to do is leave a note, right? Like in somebody's mailbox. Hi, we came by, haven't seen you, just let me know you're okay. I think there are other things that a lot of staff do to check on somebody. If they have like are there notices posted on their door? Have they brought them in? If they usually pick up their interagency mail, if they have a mailbox, are there things sitting there? Have they been removed, depending on what's normal for that person? And then are there other, so a lot of times it might be like, if there's no sort of cause for concern, it could be that they're saying like, we'll check again. Or it could be, if there are cause for concern, maybe there's an emergency contact, maybe there's a place that they may go look for them in the community. Maybe they'll ask the staff to sort of keep an eye out for them. Or maybe they'll say, we really feel like this is an emergency. We feel like we need to check on them in their unit. In which case it could be either done by, calling emergency services to do that, or by, if it's deemed an emergency, keying the door. But that's not the first, second, or third thing that we start doing.
Right. And if Margot, for the record, and absolutely, if a person is not in the room and there is a concern, certainly our providers check with the police, they check with the hospitals. They do everything that that a person may do for a family member or a friend if they really have a concern, if that is unusual. And at times that has made a huge difference. We also expect our providers, when actually somebody is in the hospital, to know that and to check in with them. And so, there's also that part. I actually just got a report of somebody passing away in hospice, because we all ask our providers to not report that to us as an emergency, but to let us know. The provider knew because the provider was one of the contacts for this person. And so that is what we expect in permanent supportive housing. Otherwise, we wouldn't have supportive housing. We could just pay for a subsidy and let people take care of themselves. But John, I really hear what you're saying about having experienced trauma and the thin line that we may feel it's something that is for the best of people, and that it could also feel disempowering. I think we're really, really trying to strike a balance. And that's part of the reason why services are voluntary. Yes, services are voluntary, but being somewhat okay in one of our buildings, it's a responsibility that our providers have. So,
Okay.
but I do hear you, and it's
Other comments?
a hard one to balance.
I'm gonna admit, and maybe this sounds a little funny, but I'm actually on Saturday heading up to Oregon to see my girlfriend for a few weeks, and I was actually the reason I'm mentioning this is I was thinking about sort of trolling this new policy by just disappearing and then of course making them worry about me just to punish them. So.
Now I'm going to tell them.
Yeah.
So just one real quick personal story. So my mom is a widow of about 10 years now, but her attitude is that, and she reminds us, she says, I'm 3 times 7 and then some. So I can control my own life. And we're like, okay, we're fine with that. So our compromise was, we will come by and check on you here and there and all these kind of things, and you can still have your autonomy to a point because you're an elderly citizen now, and we have to err on the side of how do we balance you feeling like you're still living in your own home, but at the same time we recognize the fact that you're not the person you were 40 years ago. And so now we're going to try and strike a balance where you still can live independently, but at the same time we're going to either check on you or spend the night with you here and there, that kind of stuff. And so that balance works. It's the care part.
Yeah. Thank you.
Other comments?
Maybe I'd be willing to compromise for our elders. Maybe once you hit a certain age, you can't opt out anymore. I know it sounds a little disempowering, but once you're in your 80s and living in supportive housing, and I certainly hope that more 80-year-olds aren't living in SROs because they're not for any type of disabled people. And I admit as a disabled person living in an SRO, but I just But yeah, once you're like in your 80s, like we need people checking on you. But when I'm gonna be turning 34 next month, and I really don't need and like people like me don't really need it. I'm disabled, but all I really needed was to be stabilized and at home. So.
Okay. Okay, yeah.
Dan Jordan for the record. I'm kind of feeling like people that are young, healthy, should be able to opt out, whereas people that are elderly, chronic illness, terminal illness, should have wellness checks. I can't tell you how many dead bodies I have found in rooms in private hotels. And a lot of the management are terrified to go check on somebody. They'd rather tell you, oh, I saw the person yesterday or a day or two ago, when in all reality is the person's been laying in their room for 2 or 3 weeks dead. And I've experienced finding those bodies numerous times, both at the Lawrence Hotel and where I'm at now. It's no fun.
Yeah, Cliff.
I just want to say, I think no matter what chronological age people are at, life still happens. And sometimes we don't know what's around the bend. And things are going to happen to each and every one of us. And I come back to the fact that, we're caring about people and their lives matter. And to me, that should be the priority in terms of, how do we balance autonomy with care, particularly for those who, in that demographic group, live in supportive housing, have sort of come to the city shelter system, and have done a really good job of trying to manage their lives, get their lives back on track. But still, we know that we still have to be proactive and support all the tenants that are in supportive housing, and that means there are a number of areas that we have to balance and navigate.
Okay. Do we have other comments? Okay. Well, thank you for a very interesting discussion. I think we raised a lot of important points that the department can factor into their process. So if there's no further comment, I'm going to thank our guest for helping us with this. Then we're going to move on to item 4. All right. Administrative announcements. We already spoke about the ordinance. Jennifer here has helped us with copies of the directories. We have over here, we have 40 copies. Maybe you can grab them, or you can grab them after the meeting. Take as many as you like.
Translation is on the way for Chinese.
We're working on translations for Spanish and Chinese for the directory. So we hope to have those fairly soon, hopefully by the next meeting, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So Angela will have Angela will have your translation hopefully next time.
Good.
Okay. Yeah.
And I'm sure you said this already, but this will also be on the website, right?
It's already on the website.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
But we have hard copies now.
Yeah. Thank you. Is the website on here? I think it is, but it's probably not very hard to find.
It's on the SRO Task Force website.
Wait, okay.
What about
Oh, yeah,
adding a
okay.
line here saying
So that's
this
like
is
it.
available on this website?
so people know.
I think it says it actually, yeah.
On the second page?
Instructions on the right to review.
On the second page?
Page 4.
Page
Page
4,
four.
on the instructions.
Oh, it's on here.
Yeah, so I just found it, thank you.
Okay, we have,
Given the volume of data resources, directories also available on the task force website.
okay,
I
yeah.
think that's right.
Okay, any further discussion? All right. Item 6 is reports from SRO collaboratives. Cliff, do you have anything you want to mention?
Well, I'll just say, just in terms of the cases we've seen in the last, I think, 6 weeks, we haven't seen as many evictions that we had been seeing coming into our office. There are still some ongoing issues with habitability, but for the most part, if you call it a trend, things have sort of slowed down in terms of the intake we've been doing. And also the outreach to some of the private hotels for us has not yielded a lot of complaints in the last 6 weeks. So that's good to see. Other than that, I would say that we just had our annual holiday party for all of our tenant leaders and peer counselors. Yeah,
All right.
that's concluded, I think.
Great, thank you. Angela?
Just like Kirkland, we have our holiday parties as well for our tenants. One thing that I would like to say is recently I tried to help our tenant with catering and hoarding issues, but found it kind of difficult to get the service. I guess I tried to contact the people to get some service, but the social worker actually went there, but it's a tough situation because on the social worker's standpoint, the tenant did not stress that they need the service, but it was my observation that the tenant himself would not see a problem at all. Like even if there are cockroaches crawling everywhere, ants everywhere, so the social worker would just say, well, there's nothing we can do if they don't want the service. So I don't know what else to do.
This wasn't a private, oh, sorry, Margaret, for the record, was this adult protective services that you called?
Yeah.
We've had the same issues that, you know, if a tenant says, I don't need it, then there's nothing that they can do.
But then,
but maybe you can.
So, Larry, oh, go ahead.
I have some additional comments to make about this family. It's not a single person's dwelling. It's a family with a mom and a disabled son also. This tenant himself is disabled. The son is having developmental disability. The mom has to work all the time, so will not be able to meet with the social worker. So, I don't know. So you see the situation.
Very
there.
problematic,
Yes.
yes.
Yeah.
And this is a private SRO, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Larry?
Larry Kessler, DPH. So I don't know if you contacted we do have a psychiatric social worker now on staff. I don't know if you met her yet.
No, I don't think so.
Mabel Brown. Yeah, so we have somebody on staff now. We can go out there, and if there's cockroaches, as you know, we can address the cockroaches as well. But we
And
also address her
actually-
specifically for hoarding and cluttering.
What happened is I contact I got a contact for your vendor that go and estimate how much it costs for that unit. We came back with an estimate, but then I was told the tenants will have to pay that amount to get it done. So that's how I get the adult protective service.
Right.
And after the social worker went there, they said, well, since the tenant refused to move the stuff, there's nothing we can do. So that's one.
That's a common thing we deal with a lot throughout the hundreds of SROs in San Francisco, and we do try to connect them to services through our social worker. If that doesn't work, then we do take them through the enforcement process. Sometimes that's enough to make them take it seriously and maybe start reaching out a little more to with the possibility of losing their unit, to take it a little more seriously.
Maybe I can
I can
get
give you
the
phone
forward
numbers.
of that.
Yeah, I can do that.
Sam Patel for the record. We just went through a similar
Situation.
event, just exactly like yours. Just a couple, their room was so infested with cockroaches. We worked with the health department. We even went to the hearing. They got an order. We went through this whole process. It took us over 6 months. We finally had to go through the legal process to evict them. In the meantime, we had to close down the 3 units that were underneath them, the 2 units next to them, and the 3 units above them, because there was just so many cockroaches coming out of this. They even had legal attorneys that came in there. They walked in and turned right back out again, and we had to. It all took over 6 months and over $10,000 just to get them out of here, to get the building, because of that 1 unit, the whole building was just being overrun with cockroaches. I mean, it's just, and it's an 89 unit building, and it took, and we tried, we brought in services, we asked everybody, but when they say no, you can't do anything. So these are things that we do go through.
Our idea is that we want to be able to keep the situation under control so the tenant could stay in the unit and have a healthy housing. That's the main concern that I have for the tenant. Not that the tenant would be evicted or anything like that.
Yeah,
That's not what Sam is saying,
And
I
then,
don't think.
just to be clear, we tried everything and anything. I had pest control come in every week to spray that area, but it was just so bad that the pest control company could not control it. It was impossible. I mean, we finally had to get to a point where we had to evict him. We had no choice, otherwise the building was going to be condemned, basically. So it happens.
It's very common. We had 2 cases last week at the director hearing for what Sam's talking about, and then we had 2 preliminary hearings this week for 2 more cases. It's an unfortunate thing. We hope sometimes that starting the enforcement early gets them to take it seriously, but sometimes it's a mental health issue, and there's not much we can do about it.
And if I may just ask, the health department was great. They helped us all the way through. Just, they tried to talk to them. We got services. It just didn't work. It didn't happen.
Yeah, our goal obviously is not to have somebody evicted. We work hard to make sure that doesn't happen. We try our best.
And Peter Keith, the city attorney, I want to echo what Larry said. I mean, often it takes a citation from the health department in order to convince people that there really is a problem and that they should accept the help that's being offered to them. And that's something that we consider an enforcement success story, right? I mean, it's, so many of these problems get solved after a citation gets issued, but then people get to keep their units, they have to stay in place, and the hazard gets dealt with. And so I would encourage people not to be fearful that calling DPH means the next thing that's going to happen is an eviction. That's not how we see our process as working, and that's usually, in the vast majority of situations, it's starting the enforcement process that leads to a quick solution.
I mean, if I may add to that, it's not just the tenants who should be afraid. We encourage even all the owners and managers to call DPH to get the help. I mean, it's not just them, and they're very good about it, and it helps.
Just a quick story, echoing what Angela was saying. We had a case last week, and speaking of not realizing cockroaches were a problem, the gentleman at the podium, the tenant, had cockroaches on him and didn't even really think it was, the hearing officer was pretty shocked and everybody was pretty shocked, but there's this sense of it's not a problem, like what's the big deal here? Until they get to a hearing and realize, no, this is serious, this is wrong, you can't have cockroach harborage and breeding in your room. So sometimes it helps, but not always, unfortunately. I want to just say something real quick about the SRO collaboratives in general, that they were great last week. I don't know if it was Central City, which one it was, but we were having a hard time with a tenant, and the SRO collaborative, I'm not sure which one, really came in and did a great job on addressing stuff. We really have a hard time paying a lot of attention to individuals. There's so many of them, but they were excellent in providing services and getting the tenant connected. So unfortunately, I'm not sure which one it was, but the senior inspector was telling me that they did a great job. Okay. Thank you for that.
All right, there's no other comments on item 6. We'll move to item 7, future meetings. Are there any suggestions?
Just
Okay.
Like I said, and I guess this discussion about wellness checks brings up something I've been trying to bring up, is tenants' rights in nonprofit hotels. And like I might have said this at last month's meeting, but I do plan on having asking Supervisor-elect Matt Haney to hold a hearing on this and request that DPH report, because there's just a lot of there is a sense of nebulousness, and I just want these issues addressed and see where we can go from here, and that could be a good tie-in to like something, to a broad conversation we could have, and then other things. And the other thing that maybe water quality issues, because sometimes I do get a little concerned about some of these SROs and the water in there. Like it might sometimes it looks a little like funky. So like we could see like if that's ever been an issue, and see what we can do about it.
Okay. Are there any suggestions? Other suggestions on other topics? Yeah.
Service animals in the hotels.
Okay. Yeah, we were talking about doing that for this time, but the wellness thing came up. So, all right. Others? Margot?
Yeah, Margot, for the record, so I saw in the minutes that the issue came up and said it sounded like you were going to suggest, you were going to invite some people to, so that it's not just a discussion, but that there's among ourselves. But
Yeah, well, who were the suggestions that we were
Well, I
talking
guess
PCA.
SPCA, I think, was one.
And then MOD,
And the
where's
mayors
the
of
disability?
Right.
Okay. So, yeah, we'll try to line up
That'd
somebody.
be great.
Just want to say I'd be totally fine with having this as soon as possible, because it's been on the radar for so long.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So we'll move that. Okay. Anything else on item 7? Item 8 is general public comment. Seeing none. Item 9, adjournment. Do I see a motion for adjournment? Jordan, seconded by Angela and Dan. All in favor? All right, carries. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, if someone, we were just a bare quorum, so if someone voted against adjournment, we'd be here forever.